War 1 minute ago, court. Disgusted as Cuba Gooding Jr. reveals this detail. Diddy ruined my life. Federal Courthouse, Southern District of New York, morning session. The double oak doors opened with a quiet groan. Every eye in the courtroom turned as Cuba Gooding Jr. stepped through. He didn't look left or right. He didn't smile. He walked slowly, every step deliberate, as though carrying a weight he had long refused to drop. The man who once shouted, "Show me the money," now looked like he had nothing left to sell. He took the witness stand wearing a charcoal gray suit that sagged slightly on his frame. The fit, like the man, seemed worn by time. He didn't adjust the mic, didn't ask for water. He sat, exhaled once, then began. "I'm not here to protect anyone anymore," he said quietly. "I'm here to tell the truth, especially if it hurts." A soft murmur stirred the room, quickly silenced. This was Cuba's first public testimony about his association with music mogul Sean Diddy Combs and the explosive scandal that had already begun tearing down what many once saw as an untouchable empire. "I met Sean through a mutual friend," he continued. "Early 2000s. He was charming, magnetic. He made you feel important. But that charm came with a price." "What kind of price?" the prosecutor asked. Cuba looked down at his hands. "You got pulled in. The parties started, casual yacht parties, mixers, that kind of thing. But they got darker." He described one particular night, his voice tightening. "We were on his yacht. He kept saying, 'I got something special for you.' Over and over. I didn't get it at first." The courtroom was silent. There was a young guy there. Lil Rod, they called him. I looked nervous, too quiet. Sean told him to sit next to me, said, "Relax." He kept looking around like he didn't want to be there. Cuba took a breath. I tried to make small talk, but he was frozen. I knew something was off. He looked at the jury. "I didn't touch him. I didn't do anything. I swear to God." Whatever Sean had planned, I didn't play that game. "Did you feel threatened?" the prosecutor asked. "Not exactly," Cuba said, "but controlled. You don't say no to Sean. He had people, eyes. You could feel it. He said he left early. That night stuck with him, not because of what he did, but because of what he didn't." The prosecutor nodded slowly. "But your name came up anyway." "Yeah," Cuba said quietly. "And I lost it. I thought I was going to lose everything. Again." He admitted to past wrongs. "I've made mistakes. I've hurt people. I pleaded guilty. I paid. But I didn't do this. And they're using my name now to shield themselves as everything collapses. I won't let them." The courtroom listened in stillness. The prosecution played a deposition clip from Lil Rod describing the same yacht party. Cuba stared straight ahead. When the clip ended, he spoke again. "If I ever made anyone feel uncomfortable, I'm sorry, but I didn't touch that kid. I didn't hurt anyone that night. And if they want to use me to muddy the water, they chose the wrong man." Then the story widened. "At Diddy's mansion in Miami, you gave up your phone at the door.
Hey
Not
guys,
unusual. But
not
then they
to
gave you
disturb
robes.
your
Spa-themed, they
session
said.
or
But
anything,
it
but I have
felt
no idea what
staged."
happened.
He described
I
masked
noticed that
guests,
I
heavy
froze
NDAs,
and then
cameras,
my
some
camera
visible,
wouldn't
some not.
even
"It felt like a trap
load
disguised as a
back
party,"
in.
he
But
said.
we're back.
"There were celebrities,
Um,
athletes, execs.
I'll talk to
Everyone
you guys
acted
in
like it was
20
normal."
minutes.
"Have you ever seen anyone physically harmed?" the prosecutor asked. "I didn't see it with my own eyes," Cuba said. "But I heard crying. I heard screams. I saw people rushing out the back like secrets." "Did you ask questions?" "No," he admitted. "I didn't want answers. That's what I live with." The judge called for a 10-minute recess. Cuba remained in his seat, leaned forward, whispered something the mic picked up. "God forgive me." He didn't cry for himself. He cried for what he hadn't stopped, for the silence he maintained, for the truths he buried. When the court reconvened, he returned to the stand. His shoulders seemed heavier. His voice is more grounded. "There's something I've never said out loud," he began. "One night at Diddy's house in L.A., I walked upstairs. I heard a scream. I thought it was just the party, but then I saw a security guard slam a door shut like he was hiding something. He paused, breathing hard. I asked what was going on. He said, "This room's off limits, Mr. Gooding." I left. I didn't press. He looked up. That's what haunts me. He described how years later, when lawsuits started surfacing, he saw familiar faces in the news. I recognized them. Different names, but the same fear in their eyes. He looked out over the courtroom. I could have spoken up, but I didn't. I thought people wouldn't believe me, that they'd think I was deflecting. He sat back, exhaled slowly. I stayed quiet. And that's the real sickness. Not just what happens behind those doors, but the silence that lets it keep happening. The prosecutor approached slowly. "Why speak now?" "Because I have a son," Cuba said, "and because silence doesn't protect anyone, it just makes the monsters bolder." He talked about how his career dried up after his own legal troubles. Friends vanished, calls stopped, but one person kept reaching out. Sean still called, still invited me, like he knew I owed him something. Then came a photo, 2013, Bahamas, Cuba sitting next to Diddy. In the background, blurry, barely clothed young guests. "I didn't know they were that young," he said, voice tight. "We just smiled for the camera." He paused. "I look happy in that photo, and now all I can think is who was suffering just outside the frame." He closed his eyes. "That picture haunts me." Federal Courthouse. Afternoon session. The jury filed back into the box. Reporters tapped fresh pages into their notepads. Cuba Gooding Jr. returned to the witness stand. He didn't wait to be asked a question. "I have to speak on this next part," he said, gripping the edge of the witness stand, "because I saw something I can't unsee." The courtroom quieted. It was a weekend retreat. Up in the Hollywood Hills. Sean flew us in. No press. No phones. Everyone had to sign NDAs at the airport. He paused. It was supposed to be somebody's birthday, but it felt more like a ceremony than a celebration. He described the tension in the air. People whispering instead of laughing. Staff avoiding eye contact. A house so lavish it made silence echo. By midnight, they started handing out masks. Black and gold. Said it was themed. But when I walked into the back wing of the house, Cuba's voice broke slightly. It felt like I stepped into another world. He looked down, then continued. There were people lined up, like models at a casting call. Some barely dressed, some looked scared, others resigned. In the center of it all was Sean, like a king, like he owned the air in the room. The prosecutor leaned forward. "What did you do next?" I turned around, Cuba said. "I didn't want to know. I didn't want to be a part of it. But I made the mistake of looking back." He described being confronted in the hallway by one of Combs' security guards. He stepped close, said, "You didn't see anything, Mr. Gooding." And I nodded. That's all I could do. I wasn't brave back then. His voice softened, eyes glassy. That silence, that nod, that's the part I regret the most. The prosecutor let the words hang in the air. "Some people are going to say I'm doing this to save face," Cuba said. "But if telling the truth now stops even one person from getting hurt like that, then it's worth it." He shifted in his seat. There were people at that party who now pretend they weren't. Actors, executives, faces you'd recognize. But back then, they saw everything, just like I did. The prosecutor approached a large monitor. A photo appeared, a 2014 BET after-party in Atlanta. "Do you remember this night?" Cuba nodded. "That was the night in the basement club." "What happened there?" "There was a girl. Looked barely legal. Maybe not even that. Dancing on a table." Sean clapped and pointed. A few minutes later she was gone. Security led her to a side room. He paused. One juror covered their mouth. "Did you report it?" "No," Cuba whispered. "I told myself she'd be fine, that it wasn't my place. But deep down I knew." He looked across the courtroom. "You think Hollywood is a dream, but sometimes it's just a polished nightmare. He talked about another night, Las Vegas, a hallway, a young woman being dragged by her arm. I didn't know her name, but I saw her eyes. She was trying to signal me. I just walked away. He clenched the arms of his chair. It keeps me up at night. The prosecutor nodded. Did you ever try to tell someone? I did. Once. A lawyer friend in 2016. I told him about the masks, the parties, the silence. He said, drop it. Told me the NDAs would bury me, that no one would believe me with my own charges. So I shut up again. He sat upright. But then Cassie came forward, then Lil Rod. That's when I knew I wasn't the only one carrying this weight. He looked at the jury. I told the prosecution, put me on the stand. I'll talk. If I'd had someone do that for that girl in Vegas, maybe her story wouldn't just be a cautionary tale. He took a breath. I'm not looking for redemption. That's between me and God. I'm looking for justice, for the people who didn't make it out of those houses. He turned toward the defense table. I hope you hear this, Sean. I hope you remember every name, every scream. Every party you turn into a prison, his voice cracked. Because we remember now. The judge called for recess, but this time Cuba stood taller. The room didn't clap, didn't speak. They simply watched. Because sometimes silence isn't protection. Sometimes it's a confession. And today, Cuba Gooding Jr. chose to speak. When the courtroom reconvened, the prosecutor resumed slowly, as if stepping through a fog of tension still hanging in the air. He asked Cuba to elaborate on what he meant when he described the Hollywood Hills retreat as a ceremony. Cuba hesitated. It wasn't a birthday. It wasn't about someone turning 40 or celebrating a project. It was a presentation, a showcase. People paraded in, watched. We were chosen. By who? The prosecutor asked. Cuba met his gaze. By Sean, or someone acting on his word. There was a list. It felt choreographed. He described trays of champagne mirrors lining the hallway blackouts in rooms with surround sound music and no visible exits. One juror leaned forward as Cuba continued. Some rooms had mattresses, some had cameras. One had a lock on the outside, not the inside. Gasps echoed in the gallery. You stayed? The prosecutor asked. No, Cuba replied. I left before sunrise. Told them I had a shoot the next day. That was a lie. I just needed to run. He described calling his manager from the airport and swearing never to attend another one of Sean's events. Did your manager ask why? He said, don't say it on the phone. That's all. Cuba's voice dropped. The silence wasn't just mine. It was baked into everything. He recalled a director he once worked with. He joked, Hollywood doesn't run on ideas. It runs on leverage. The prosecutor leaned in. What kind of leverage did Diddy have? Cuba didn't blink. Footage, texts, photos, threats of blacklisting. He said some guests left their phones at the door only to find photos later leaked subtle damaging enough to keep them quiet. There was one producer, Cuba recalled. He threatened to go public. The next day, his project was canceled. Weeks later, his agent dropped him. Do you believe that was connected? The prosecutor asked. I don't believe in coincidences anymore. The room fell quiet again. Cuba closed his eyes. I used to think I was protecting myself, but now I know I was protecting a system. He looked up, and that system's built on fear. The judge excused the jury for the day. Cuba remained seated as everyone rose. The cameras were off, but the eyes remained, watching, listening. Tomorrow, the prosecution promised they would present physical evidence. Cuba would return to the stand. And his story was far from over. Morning light seeped through the courthouse windows like a slow truth. Reporters arrived earlier than usual, their eyes sharper. Something had shifted. Day 3 of testimony wasn't about suspense anymore. It was about reckoning. Cuba Gooding Jr. took the stand again. No preamble, no small talk. The prosecutor stood one hand on the table. Mr. Gooding, yesterday you said the system was built on fear. Can you describe how that system operated from what you saw and what you were expected to ignore? Cuba looked straight ahead. It wasn't just what we were told. It was what we weren't allowed to ask. He described the invisible code. Events where you were told, don't bring your team. People whose names were whispered, never written. Rooms that didn't appear on floor plans. There were favors, gifts, plane tickets, hotel upgrades. People looked the other way because they didn't want to lose the invitation. But you didn't get those perks for free. They came with silence. He paused. There was one night, London, 2017, after an awards show. Sean booked the whole rooftop of a hotel, said it was private. But when I got there, I saw too many unfamiliar faces, too young, too out of place. What did you do? The prosecutor asked. I stayed an hour, that's it. I left when one girl, maybe 16, tried to pour me a drink and wouldn't say who she was with. He swallowed hard. I told security. They laughed, said, it's not your business. That's when I knew what the game was. Cuba reached for water, his hand steady now. I didn't just witness the silence, I upheld it. The prosecutor walked slowly to the screen again. New footage appeared. A clip leaked anonymously from a 2019 party in Los Angeles. It showed Cuba in the background, laughing, sipping a drink. The camera panned briefly to a side room. A blurred figure ushered a young woman inside. Cuba watched. His face was unmoving. I remember that night, he said. I remember feeling like I didn't belong, like I was being tolerated, not welcomed. I left after 15 minutes. Why? Because I realized I wasn't there for the party. I was there for optics. Sean liked to surround himself with chaos and people he thought owed him silence. He turned slightly toward the gallery. Let me be clear, I'm not the hero of this story. I'm just the first to stop lying to myself. He then described the aftermath of speaking up. Friends not calling, studios pulling projects, online trolls saying he was trying to shift blame. I didn't come here to save face, he said. There's no face left to save. I came because no one else did. The prosecutor placed several photos on the screen. One showed Cuba and Sean at a 2015 benefit event, both smiling. In the background, a teenage girl walking past, barely dressed. Do you recognize her? No, Cuba said. But I remember the look on her face, like she didn't belong, like she wanted to disappear. He paused. Do you ever wonder what happened to people you never even knew? Because I do. All the time. A hush spread across the courtroom. The judge allowed a break. During recess, Cuba sat alone. No one approached. The room seemed to orbit him, gravity centered not on fame, but on the weight of conscience. When court resumed, the prosecutor's tone changed. Mr. Gooding, if you could speak to the people who never came forward, the ones still silent, what would you say? Cuba didn't hesitate. I'd say you don't owe anyone your silence. I'd say your story is still yours, even if they stole the ending. And I'd say whatever they took from you, it's not gone. They don't get to erase it. He looked up, eyes full, but clear. You don't get to erase this. But the testimony didn't stop there. Cuba asked if he could address one final incident, something he hadn't spoken of even during pretrial interviews. The judge allowed it. There was a girl, Cuba said slowly. I don't know her name, but I remember her dress. Bright yellow, too short. Her shoes were too big, like they weren't hers. She looked lost. He paused. Sean noticed her, whispered something to one of his people. 5 minutes later, she wasn't in the room anymore. Cuba clenched his jaw. I asked where she went. They told me she left, but I knew better. The way they rushed to say it, the way no one else mentioned it. He paused. That was the last party I ever went to. The prosecutor leaned in. Did you try to find her? Cuba nodded. 3 weeks later, I called someone I knew who worked at that house, asked about her. He told me, don't ask again, hung up. Silence again. Heavy settled. Cuba looked to the judge. Thank you for letting me say that. He turned once more toward the gallery. I know my testimony won't undo what happened, but if there's even one person watching who feels like their voice doesn't matter, please know it does. I should have said something sooner, but I'm saying it now. The judge called for adjournment, and as people filed out, no one spoke of scandals or stardom. Only silence, and the man who finally broke him. Court resumed just past 1:30 p.m. The air felt heavier than usual. Jurors filed in slowly, their faces drawn. Several members of the gallery were already seated, notebooks open but untouched. Cuba Gooding Jr. walked back to the witness stand and adjusted the microphone himself this time. He didn't wait to be prompted. He simply nodded at the judge, then turned toward the prosecutor. "You asked me what the system looked like," he said. "Now let me tell you what it felt like." He described moments that didn't make headlines. The silent glances across rooms, the women who left through back exits, the men who whispered instead of warned. There was a code, and we all followed it whether we admitted it or not. You don't speak on what you didn't witness fully. You don't ask about what makes you uncomfortable. You just move, and they let you stay. The prosecutor asked if he could speak more about the types of people at these parties. They weren't all predators. That's the trap in how we think about this. Some were just complicit. Some thought it was culture. Some were scared. Others were seasoned into silence. People like me. He paused. I saw a comedian at one of those events. Funny guy. Everyone loves him. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Don't stare too long. They'll think you're next." The courtroom murmured. The judge did not intervene. Another time I was sitting in a media lounge. A girl walked by. Couldn't have been older than 17. One producer leaned over to me and said, "She'll be in a deal by the weekend if she survives the introductions." And we all just laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was normal. He took a slow breath. "Do you understand what it means for a room to be full of people and still feel like a secret's being kept by everyone?" He recalled one night when a studio head whispered in his ear, "It's just how things work." That line haunted me, because it gave all of us an excuse not to care. The prosecutor displayed another image, a masked party in Miami 2018. Cuba is pictured in a crowd, robes, masks, dimmed chandeliers. In the background, someone being carried. "Do you remember this?" "Yes." "Who's that being carried?" "I don't know her name, but I remember what I thought someone should do something, and then I left. Again." "Why didn't you?" Cuba hesitated. "Because that room wasn't built for heroes. It was built for ghosts." He turned to the jury. "You know what they say? They say silence protects you, that it keeps you safe, but it doesn't. It just makes you forget how to speak. And then one day, you don't recognize your own voice." The room was still, the kind of still that makes paper feel loud. A woman in the back wiped her eyes. One juror looked away. The prosecutor placed a stack of NDAs on the bench. "These are copies of non-disclosure agreements, signed by guests at parties you attended. Is your name among them?" Cuba nodded. 4 of them. "Why did you sign?" "Because I thought silence was loyalty. Because I was scared. Because that's what we were told to do. And today I broke them. Every last one." The judge interrupted. "Mr. Gooding, are you aware of the legal risks in violating these agreements?" Cuba replied without flinching. "I'm aware. I just stopped caring more about contracts than people." The judge let the moment pass. Cuba leaned forward, hands on the witness box. "Someone once told me, it's not your job to fix the room." Maybe that's true. But if you see a fire and walk away, you're not innocent. You're just hoping someone else burns first. He sat back, let the words linger. Outside the courtroom, a group of advocacy survivors huddled around a phone, watching the live stream. One woman whispered, "He said it. He said what no one else would." And as the court adjourned for the day, the press didn't rush out for sound bites. They just sat there, for a moment longer than usual. Sometimes the most powerful thing a room can hear is the sound of someone finally refusing to stay silent. The courtroom was quieter than usual the next morning. No one whispered, no one scrolled. The gallery filled early. A different kind of reverence had taken hold, not out of awe, but out of gravity. Cuba Gooding Jr. entered wearing the same suit, same expression. Only the weight behind his eyes had shifted. He took the stand. The prosecutor began carefully. "Mr. Gooding, you've testified to what you saw and felt at these events. Today we'd like to talk about what you witnessed when no cameras were rolling." Cuba exhaled. "All right," he said. "Let's talk about what they did when no one was watching." He described the rhythm of how these parties operated. The public-facing parts were orchestrated, curated, polished. Celebrities filtered through. Bottles popped. Instagram posts captured smiles. But when the last photographers left, things changed. They called it after dark. That's when the phones were locked away, the security tightened, and the doors started closing behind people. He recounted an event in 2016 at a New York brownstone owned by one of Combs' associates. There was a woman in the kitchen. Looked like a caterer at first. She was crying. I asked if she was okay. One of the hosts told me to stop asking questions. Said she was just emotional. 10 minutes later, she was gone. Never saw her again. The gallery was frozen. A court sketch artist stopped drawing. Cuba looked to the jury. "Have you ever walked out of a room and felt like you failed someone?" That's what that night became for me. The prosecutor showed text messages from Cuba to an unnamed assistant the next day. In them, he wrote, "That party last night was off. People weren't acting right. Something's wrong. I don't want to go back." "Did you?" the prosecutor asked. Cuba nodded. "Twice. I told myself I was overthinking it, that I'd imagined it. But every time I went back, it got harder to lie to myself." He described another encounter, a woman shaking as she left a private room. "She looked at me like I was supposed to do something. But I didn't. I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself I didn't know for sure." His voice broke. I knew. The prosecutor showed footage from a party in 2020, unreleased to the public, taken by a staff member later dismissed. In the background, a young woman is being helped down a hallway by two men. Her shoes are missing. Her head is lowered. Cuba's face changed. I saw that he said. Not that exact moment, but the aftermath. I saw her sitting in a stairwell after, alone. She was shaking. I offered her water. She wouldn't look at me. He took a long pause. There's a moment when you realize the people you once looked up to aren't just flawed. They're dangerous, and you're part of the machine that lets them be. The prosecutor changed tack. "Let's talk about Sean Combs directly." Cuba nodded. "Did he ever directly instruct or imply what you should ignore?" "Yes. Once in Miami, he said, 'You've seen enough to know what happens to people who get chatty.' Said it with a smile, like it was just a joke, but it wasn't. 'Did you feel threatened?' I felt warned." He described Diddy as a man who never raised his voice, but always made you feel like silence was the only safe response. Then came a revelation that shifted the room. There was a list, Cuba said, a guest list, yes, but another one. Names of people who could be useful. People who owed favors. People who had skeletons. I saw it once, briefly. It wasn't labeled, but I knew what it was. The prosecutor leaned forward. "Were you on it?" "Yes," Cuba said. I recognized the color code next to my name. Same color as two other actors I knew. Both were later named in minor scandals, and then, suddenly quiet. He looked straight ahead. That's how they kept people quiet. Not with guns, with gossip, with footage, with memory. One juror blinked, rapidly, overwhelmed. "Have you ever seen someone leave that circle and come out clean?" "No," Cuba answered. "You leave scared, or you stay scared." He lowered his voice. "And that's why I'm here. Because I'd rather be scared out loud than complicit in silence." As the morning session ended, no one moved. The judge stood, and even the bailiff delayed his call. Not because of celebrity, because something deeper had shifted in the room. Something unspoken had finally been spoken, and there was still more to come. Afternoon sunlight streaked through the courtroom blinds. What had begun days ago as a celebrity testimony had become something else entirely. A reckoning, a confession, a dismantling of complicity by someone who had once benefited from it. Cuba Gooding Jr. was called back to the stand one final time. The gallery was full. The silence was no longer suspenseful, it was sacred. The prosecutor stood a new tone in his voice, not sharp, not dramatic, steady. "Mr. Gooding, you've testified to what you saw, what you felt, and what you failed to act on. Today I ask, what do you want the world to take away from this?" Cuba looked up. "That silence is a chain, and I broke mine." He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. The room heard him. "You think you're protecting people when you stay quiet, but really you're protecting power, and power doesn't thank you. It uses you until you forget who you are." He recounted the first time he tried to speak up. A closed-door conversation with a former publicist. Her response: "You're not clean enough to be credible." He remembered those words. They faced his silence for years. "But that's the trick, isn't it?" he said. "They make you think you're too flawed to stand up, so nobody ever will." The prosecutor showed one last photo, a group shot. A summer party in the Hamptons. Cuba standing beside Diddy. In the corner of the image, barely visible, a young woman with smeared makeup and a vacant stare. "Do you know who that is?" No, Cuba replied, "but I've seen that face before. Different names, different nights, same silence." He paused. "I think about the people who didn't make it out, who weren't famous enough to be heard, who couldn't afford to disappear. I'm not here to save them, I'm here to say their stories matter, even if no one listened." The judge asked if he had anything else to add. Cuba stood. "I was complicit. I smiled in the photos. I said nothing in the rooms. I let fear make me useful. I will carry that, but I won't be silent anymore." A hush followed. He looked at the defense table. "I hope you hear this, Sean. I hope the people still hiding behind the name heard it. We remember now. And when money doesn't make memories disappear." He turned back to the jury. "I'm not asking you to see me as a victim. I'm not. I'm asking you to believe that someone can be part of something awful and still decide to fight it. Late but real." He closed with a line he'd repeated in private for years, never aloud. "I stayed quiet to survive. I'm speaking now to live." The judge gavelled the session to a close, but no one moved. Not immediately. It wasn't about one man anymore. It was about a system cracking because someone finally refused to carry its silence. And outside, as the courthouse doors opened to sunlight and microphones, the only sound was footsteps. Because the truth didn't need a headline. It had already been heard.